A surprising offseason for the Bucks. Not so surprising internally. And our number one boy is back. We have the latest coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. You can hear me as the host and analyst on the Bucks Radio Network during the season. You can find Camille's work weekly on the Locked On NBA show and the Technical Foul podcast. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day each and every day. And today's episode brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Eric Name caught up with Bucks general manager Jon Horst in a rather lengthy sit down. There's a lot to take from that, and I would imagine we'll devote the bulk of the show to that. So before we get to that, Camille, let's get to the even bigger news. And we talked about it the last couple of days and really week or so of, man, if Chris Livingston's going to keep playing like this, what do you do with him? And even mentioned, is it like, can you bring him back on a two-way? And instead, the Bucks bring him back on a standard contract, a one-year deal. So as it sits right now, the roster's at 15 players. Mm-hmm. There's still options for flexibility, which we touched on and can get to in a moment. But your thoughts on seeing Chris Livingston back in the fold?
My first thought was the same thought as many everydayers I've seen on social media tagging you and just being like,
what a day.
Your boy is back. Justin's guy is back. But no, I mean, we've had the conversation so far throughout this offseason about the roster and if there's anything quite missing on the roster. Like, I feel pretty good about the guard rotation, the big rotation. It's been the wing for me that's been a little bit of a question mark, just wanting some more size there at the position outside of Kuz and Taurean Prince. And here comes Chris Livingston back into the fold again. And after his summer league performance, I've mentioned he just looks so much stronger than everyone else out there on the court. He's very adept at using his body to get to the rim. He's quicker to shoot the three, and he's been shooting that and knocking it down at a higher consistency in summer league than we've seen during his short stints on the big roster, as well as even in the G League, because if memory serves me correctly, I think he's been like a 33% three-point shooter in the G League with the Herd, somewhere around that range. So it hasn't been necessarily great. So seeing him knock down the three at a higher consistency, seeing him play faster, again, he's still a young player. There are still things that, he's making mistakes with doing, but he's playing at a speed and with a strength that says, like, there's something here worth continuing to take a look at. So I'm cool with it. I'm very cool with Chris Livingston coming back. Also fits into the youth of the team of just bringing back another young guy on the team, the roster. So I'm here for it.
I was obviously very, very happy with the news to bring Chris Livingston back in the fold. It's been a pretty strong summer league, to put it mildly, for him. And you touched on the physicality that he's been playing with. I guess the way I would put it is, he has looked exactly like he should look for being in his third go-round in Summer League. That, like, this is what you want to see, is a guy that looks like, yeah, he's clearly one of the best on the floor in this situation. And we've seen a little bit of growth, and he's more physical, that he's adapted to that style of play much more than, rookies or some guys that are getting their second taste of Summer League. So on that front, everything you needed to see, you saw it. I know people questioned too, like, well, was this an impulse move or a reactionary move of, wow, he's looking really good in Summer League, I guess we got to bring him back here. And I mean, I think it was kind of known, which we'll get to in that Jon Horst piece. There's some things we're going to have to do to give ourselves some more flexibility, but that doesn't mean we're closing the door and locking it on some of these guys. It's saloon doors that are going to swing back open here. And for Chris Livingston, the 4 games, averaging more than 20 points per game. You mentioned the 3-point shooting 38% on threes. There, a bulk of those have been corner, but just as we said with Andre Jackson Jr., find what works and just excel at that. And we've seen the averages are about 5 and 2, but we've seen some pretty nice rebound and assist games from him as well. What does this mean, if anything, for the rotation next year and his chance at cracking that?
I think from what we've seen with Doc Rivers, guys are going to have a chance to compete in training camp. Like if you can come out in training camp and show that you are the best option, you're going to get into that rotation. Because I mean, last offseason we spent a lot of time talking about how we thought AJ Green was going to take a step. AJ Green, AJ Green, AJ Green,
Yeah.
and to start the season, he was not in the rotation. And Doc mentioned later on that in training camp, he got outplayed. So to start the season, he was out of the rotation. As the season went on, practices and whatnot behind the scenes, seeing what was working on the court, he found his way back into the rotation. And now we're setting up for a year for AJ Green, where it's like we're expecting really big things this upcoming season after the work you laid last year. And I think for Chris Livingston, it's a situation when you look at who's in front of him at the three, you have, like I said, Kuz, Torian Prince, and really him. Andre Jackson Jr., if he continues to be on the roster here, we'll keep an eye on that guarantee date for his contract. But there's a chance for competition. I'm not saying like he can go on and be the starter, but maybe he could. But I could see a world where Chris Livingston finds himself, in the back end of the rotation if he's able to show in training camp and whatnot that like I'm ready for this moment. I'm ready for the moment. But ultimately, again, I like having options. I like having young guys you can throw out there to see what happens with the physicality, with the speed that he likes to play at. So I think it's really all in Chris Livingston's hands of what comes next for him.
And the interesting part is we may well find out that the 15th spot ultimately came down to a battle between Andre Jackson Jr. and Chris Livingston. They're both on the roster as of this moment, but there's certainly, I would say you're not out of the woods yet if you're one of the Ajax stands and pushing for him to make the roster, especially with some other rumblings we'll get to in just a second here. But I don't think there's any denying that Andre Jackson Jr. is a much better individual defender right now than Chris Livingston is. And he probably will finish his career as that and be a better individual defender. But I think Chris Livingston's game is more rounded. And we kind of had that same discussion about one of the names you mentioned moments ago, AJ Green, that look, AJ Green has this elite skill set. Andre Jackson Jr. bordering on an elite skill set as well, but AJ Green can do more on the other side of the floor than Andre Jackson Jr. can. So that I think was another one of the big appeals. And obviously, his size, like we've seen the Bucks experiment with Chris Livingston quite a bit the last 2 years of he played small ball 5 in summer league last year. We've seen him play some of the 4. He really size wise, his best position is going to be a 3 in this league. He has pretty good wingspan. He's 6'6". But he's still pretty boxy in his movements. And that's the challenge with the 3 and defending those spots. That and consistently knocking down threes. If he can do that, then as you mentioned before, then you got something that you can continue to develop here. So I do think it was important to say, okay, let's not just close the door on this and let's see if we can continue to nurture this throughout the season.
Yeah, because as we've mentioned in years past too, of just how important player development is going to continue to be for NBA teams, especially with how the new CBA is putting a stretch on teams, and you don't want to exceed the second apron because of all of the handcuffs that come with trying to build your roster out. And with that, player development is going to continue to be of the utmost importance to be able to find those gems. As I heard Marcus Johnson say on the Here District, find the gems in the gym. Like that's what you have to continue to try to do. Because one, we're going to talk more about it of just getting younger, playing faster, and all that goes into that. But also being able to have these contracts that are really reasonable on your books to continue to go forward while you're building around a superstar like Giannis is going to be super important. So if you can hit on some of these guys, like it goes a long way, which is why I look at the Ryan Rollins story, the AJ Green story of like two-way guys who turned out to be able to be part of the rotation for this team. You got to keep hitting on those margins and trying to find young talent you can develop into rotation pieces.
Yeah, and depth, an important piece, especially in the regular season in an Eastern Conference that we've said is up for grabs. But there's going to be a lot of teams fighting to stay in that top six. So your depth becomes important there for those 82 games as well. The big piece from yesterday, Jon Horst catching up with Eric Name and shedding some light on the offseason. We said it was a surprise for many outside the organization. Not the picture that Jon Horst painted for the internal view of the team. We'll share the details coming up next. Time to talk to you now about our friends over at Open Phone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need. Maybe you needed a plumber, something immediately for a service provider. If the first person you called didn't answer, you probably didn't wait. You moved on to the next person. And that's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone's the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. It lets you manage business calls and texts from a single app. They have a shared inbox, which proves to be a game changer, where your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat. And you can even utilize AI to handle after-hours calls, answer common questions, and capture leads so you never miss any customers. Open Phone is offering our listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Jon Horst caught up with Eric Name, and you see a lot of these pieces start to come out the past couple of days now with GMs and coaches. Our friend Tony of Locked On Pacers just had an interview with Rick Carlisle, catching up with him at Summer League. But this was a pretty lengthy sit down that Eric Name had with Jon Horst, and even mentioned, we lightly edited this interview for some clarity and to trim it down a little bit as well. But there's one big quote, the money quote to take from this. Is, well, really a couple of things. And one of them you pointed out when we were getting ready for the show, but I think the big one that everybody's already seen and started to run with was Jon Horst. I forget the exact verbiage, but essentially, we did everything humanly possible this offseason to improve the roster, which I think, as we've talked about, you look at the Myles Turner edition, they are a better team on paper right now than they were figuring to be going into the season. After that Damian Lillard injury and the unknowns there. So I do think they got better, but that quote as well, everything humanly possible, and I'll find the exact way he worded it. That leads me to believe we didn't just, keep our guys, wave and stretch Dame, sign Myles Turner and say, we did it, mission accomplished. That there are some other things the Bucks were in on and maybe are still in on, smaller scale moves that just didn't pan out.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. And when I saw the quote, him talking about them doing everything, him doing everything humanly possible to get this roster together, and just what he was talking about with Eric throughout the article, which, shout out to Eric, and the good work he continues to do at The Athletic. If I remember correctly, this was part 1. In part 2 of the Horst interview, because as you mentioned of how extensive the conversation comes out on Friday. So everybody check that out at The Athletic as well. Support Eric's work. But him mentioning that made me think, like, all the conversation we've been having about, like, maybe it's a gap year for the Bucks. It's a retool. It's the first step into a new direction. Hearing the way Jon Horst talked about his approach to this offseason made me think, like, internally maybe they tossed the idea out of, like, hey, maybe this is the type of year, but then it was quickly squashed because everything that Jon Horst was saying sounds like a guy who's loading up, trying to compete again this year, not taking a year off, but really believing in what they're able to put together on the floor, with Giannis taking more control of the offense and how they initiate it, with the understanding that, hey, some of the ways that we used to play, some of this makes a lot of sense. And some of this we need to continue to do, i.e. a floor spacing big next to Giannis that can also play really good defense. But also we need to kind of modernize the way we play a bit, with having a little bit more foot speed on the perimeter, being able to switch more often, which is why getting Jericho Sims back was important for Jon Horst and the Bucks. why getting Bobby Portis back was important, because they even mentioned they've had Bobby Portis playing a little bit differently towards the end of the year with the more switching than they did prior, when you would see Bobby in the drop coverages and things of that sort. But it seems like Jon Horst and the Bucks really do believe that what they put together this season is not gap year worthy, but contending in the East worthy. And when you see everything else happening around the Eastern Conference, we've talked so much about how it's a wide open conference this year. I understand why Horst looks at it like, no, we can compete. We have the best player in the conference, arguably best player in the world on our team. We're going to go for it.
Yeah, and the exact quote was, "We've done everything. I've done everything within my human possible power this offseason." It's you can't really dispute that when you look at the moves. And you mentioning too, when we were getting ready to record this, one of the other more interesting pieces in some of what Jon Horst had to say was how they viewed themselves coming into this offseason.
Yeah. Yeah. Does not seem like they view themselves as a team that's like, oh, we can't do any much. Like they mentioned, Jon Horst mentioned to Eric that outside of Brooklyn and Detroit, that they felt they had as much flexibility as any other team to go out there and make some moves this offseason. He was like, we didn't feel like our back was against the wall. And I was like, what? Really? You didn't feel that pressure at all? Because from the outside looking in on the situation, we've given Horst his credit for going out and getting Drew Holiday, for taking the chance and going out to get Damian Lillard. But the Bucks had so many more assets in the chest when they went out to do those moves, that this offseason, looking at it, was like, well, you got that 2031 first, and what else can you possibly do? But Horst and the Bucks looked at it like, no, we have some ways to maneuver. And the maneuver, as we saw to get Myles Turner, ended up being waiving and stretching that Damian Lillard contract, which is something that I wouldn't have thought that the Bucks would consider to do, but it opened up so much else for them to do to continue to build out this roster that they had to make that decision.
Yeah, and one of the other, I think in the first question that Eric asked him was, John gave an answer about the waiving and stretching of Damian Lillard and bringing in Myles Turner, and that we view it as the opportunity to bring in a highly productive elite free agent who's in the prime of his career, and he's an incredible fit next to Giannis, and that last piece is the most important part. But we'll hear Jon Horst kind of use this terminology for basically everything of risk and reward, and said, look, there's a risk, there's a high reward opportunity with this as well. But the interesting part to me was Jon Horst acknowledging and spelling out what a lot of us have kind of said too, when it comes back to the trade the 2031 pick and what side of the fence are you on with that. And that, look, I get trying to manage your future assets and having something to look forward to, having a nest egg for down the road. But in the here and now, you've got this guy that keeps you at that level, and you've got him for 2 years. So do everything you can to extend that. And how you do that is what you fill out around him. And his answer to say, incredible fit next to Giannis, and an opportunity for these next 2 seasons in particular, instead of what would have been Dame on our books at a full salary. We view that as really opportunistic more than anything. That part is what struck me of it. We acknowledge this didn't work with that duo, and to have Dame essentially out all of this season and $110 million basically tied up in those two with dead cap space. I mean, we're criticizing $22.5 million. I get it's 5 years, but it was, for all intents and purposes, $55 million in dead cap space for this upcoming season. So they more than sliced that in half. And his acknowledgement of these 2 years are important because Giannis can become a free agent after that. We have to remain competitive. What you mentioned earlier, we never viewed this as a gap year for that reason, that you can't say, hey, give it a year or two, Giannis, and right as you're entering free agency, possibly where you can opt out, then we feel like we'll be in a spot and we can convince you to stay. So we have to push all of our chips in for these 2 years. And this was one way to do it. And to tie back to that other thing that you mentioned too, with him saying outside of Detroit and Brooklyn, we felt like we had the most flexibility. I mean, that cements. They knew this was the end of the line for the Damian Lillard experiment. And as I think we've talked about on many of these shows, if Dame did not get injured, I think the Myles Turner signing, the wave and stretch, and Jon Horst basically saying it without saying it reaffirms there would have been a trade if there was no injury here. So they were already looking to, how do we play differently? How do we move in a new direction?
Yeah, and what does that look like? Because I mean, we have seen point Giannis like before. I actually went back to rewatch Kobe's last game in Milwaukee because that was like the first time watching Giannis for me,
Triple-double,
where
yeah.
I was like, maybe he can be a point forward because he had that triple double in that game. Some of the passes that he was making, and let me just say, going back to watch a Bucks game from 2016, the old faces that came into play there were quite entertaining. But again, it's not something new. And Jon Horst even mentioned that one of the types of guards they've looked for to put next to Giannis is a guy who can play off ball and be fine in that role, but also, if need be, initiate the offense. Like if you need 7 straight plays and it's Giannis doing what Giannis do, you can play off that. But if we need you for 7 straight plays here to initiate the offense, you can do that as well. So it's kind of like we have an idea of how this formula works. Now let's just kind of take it up to a next level of like really committing to playing this way with Giannis really being the point for our team on offense.
Yeah, a fascinating behind the scenes look where a lot of things that we assumed this offseason, I think we basically had confirmed in part one of this sit down. So I would imagine just about all of our everydayers have already read this. If you have not, by all means, check it out. And part two coming up tomorrow on The Athletic with Eric sitting down with Jon Horst. So flexibility and moves. We mentioned the decision to bring back Chris Livingston. They currently sit at 15. There's still some other things they could do to bring in another player. And there's one name that just won't go away. So we'll get into that conversation coming up next. Time to talk to you about our friends over at today's show sponsor, Monarch Money. And that's right, Monarch Money is the best way to manage your finances. If you've ever needed that to be easier, that's where Monarch Money comes in with the assist. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. You want to keep an eye on where those expenses are going. Maybe it's food delivery or subscriptions. Monarch Money has the easy way to let you do that and figure out where the money is being spent. And if you're sharing finances, Monarch Money makes it easier than ever to stay on the same page with your partner, track your long-term goals, and again, keep an eye on your spending. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. So can I interest you in Chris Paul, Camille? Because that will not go away. And the latest reporting, I forget who had this, but it's basically come down to the Clippers or the Bucks for Chris Paul. I would still assume it's the Clippers, given his family's in California. He wants to remain close to him. He did say this is his final season, right?
Yes.
So I would assume it's the Clippers, but it's just interesting that Bucks name, the inclusion of the Bucks, won't go away. And I've seen a few people say, well, it's just for leverage purposes. I mean, there's no leverage here. The Bucks and the Clippers have the same thing to offer after the Clippers just signed Bradley Beal. So it's just a veteran minimum. He's already said it's his final season. So he's not leveraging one to give him 2 years versus the other. It's interesting that we've heard the names of Al Horford and Chris Paul, and that Al Horford one has seemingly died down. But the Chris Paul one has been there for quite some time now. And you shaking your head. Are you getting nervous over this?
Nervous, not so much. That would be the type of signing that would really make me go like, but why? But why? It doesn't really seem to fit into what the Bucks
I think
have
there's
been
one
trying to
reason.
do. What's the reason?
I mean, Chris Paul is obviously a very high IQ player.
Mm-hmm.
The Bucks have not had a Chris Paul type since when? I mean, Nate Walters or Luke Ridnour. I think it would be number one, you would use him very moderately and rest him throughout the regular season, but also if the new era here is Giannis's point center, point power forward, Chris Paul, we're going to help you. Like, not that Giannis needs to learn how to pass, but
that's fair.
You're basically his teacher behind the scenes to have worked with him. And who knows, maybe Rajon Rondo's on the staff now with the exit of Joe Prunty, that you would have that component as well. But basically to have a floor general that can be a coach on the floor with Giannis, even though you could quickly say, well, how open would Giannis be to that relationship?
Right, knowing what Chris Paul and Giannis have in their
history.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, I mean that does make sense. The Rondo piece of it, if Rondo is also on the coaching staff again, I think that's also a really big help for the acceleration of point Giannis, which again, he's done it before. It's not new. We've seen him have the ball in his hands a lot, making plays for his teammates. It's just that now they're really doubling down on it of like, no, you're the primary initiator. There's no more Chris Middleton here to help share the duties. There's no Drew Holiday. There's no Damian Lillard. Like, it's you, and it's all on your shoulders here. So it makes sense. The Chris Paul piece for me, where I'm like, I just can't necessarily get in with it, is one, the age aspect of it, but two, I actually like the guard rotation that the Bucks have. And I know it's not a flashy group of guards or anything like that, but I think they work around what the Bucks are trying to accomplish with, again, seeing the growth that you can have in a Kevin Porter Jr., seeing what Ryan Rollins has. You have Cole Anthony now coming off the bench, as well as more of like that scorer role that he can play. You have your Gary Trent Jr.'s, you have your AJ Green, just the guard room in itself, not just the point guards, but the guard room, I think, is actually really strong for how the Bucks want to play, especially the defensive component of it. Like, we know young Chris Paul, like, given his size, like, he was a dog on defense. Like, not too many small guards can hold up defensively the way that Chris Paul has. But again, he's at the end of his career now. The defense isn't necessarily the same as it was before. So yeah, I'm not as interested in Chris Paul to Milwaukee in the year of 2025. But I mean, it's a name that has been brought up from Bucks fans for years of whenever Chris Paul was available. Could Chris Paul get to Milwaukee? But for me personally, that's not a fit that I want to see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to immediately dismiss it at this point. Earlier in free agency, that's when it was like, let's wait and see what else there is. He's played 20 years. He's going to turn 40 this year. This would be his 21st season. The other interesting part is, I think earlier in the offseason when this would come up, there was a lot of concern of like, oh no, does this mean Chris Paul's the starting point guard? Because I was imagine he's going to want to start where he goes. If it's coming down to the Bucks and the Clippers, he's not going to start on the Clippers. And I mean, I doubt you would start him here. I think in addition to the kind of work with, or at least be an ear for Giannis to bend in terms of playing point guard, as complicated as that relationship may be. The other bonus would be to have a floor general to run your second unit when Giannis is off the floor and get guys positioned. That part I don't hate, and I would actually be in favor of, but I think the bigger thing is what you brought up too, in that I recognize and I acknowledge there's a need for that, I think, with this group and how they're structured, especially now that it's no longer a top-heavy roster. I think they are deeper, but the elite talent is Giannis. And Myles Turner's in his prime. Myles Turner's a very good player. We have a number of guys that are very good players, but Giannis is the elite guy, that it's no longer superstar, star level guy. It's superstar and guys that fit. And I just don't want, if this move were to happen, I don't want it to be at the expense of a guy like a Ryan Rollins, where you say, this is a year for you to take a really big step forward and take on a big role with this team. And that second unit, if that is in fact where he's playing, that if it comes at that expense for any of the good that having a vet like Chris Paul and a guy to run your second unit would bring, I just think if that's the case, then it's not worth it.
Could not agree more. Could not agree more, especially after hearing like Doc Rivers during the Summer League game talk about why he believes Kevin Porter Jr. can have a big year, where he said, like, we're still kind of teaching him how to play point guard a little bit. Like when he got here, it was a lot more and one basketball, dancing with the ball. But now he's able to understand how to find his teammates better. So you're talking about the growth of these players. Like we know a lot of them are on the Jon Horst special, like these 1+1s or 2+1s with the player option. But if you can continue to find young talent that can grow and you're able to use this season a bit along the way of trying to compete, but yeah, we're giving these young guys bigger roles for them to continue to grow into, like that's how the player development continues to happen with these guys. So yeah, I'd be more open and more interested in seeing Ryan Rollins lead a second unit or Kevin Porter Jr. leading a second unit, even knowing that there are going to be growing pains associated with that. I would rather see that what we have with those guys than taking the 1 year flyer on the vet who's going to come in and it's just for the 1 year. There's nothing else to come out of that outside of what he can help teach his teammates along the way for what they take for them going forward. But again, if you have a point guard like Rajon Rondo on your roster or on your coaching staff, like you can get a lot of that from his brain as well.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, that is, I think, what happens with the 15th roster spot. And I suppose we shouldn't even term it like that because they have 15 guys under contract, but are all 15 guys who you're going to go into the season with? And the Rajon Rondo component too, because we saw him around the team a decent amount last year. He kind of hinted that he would like to get into coaching, and he certainly has a great relationship with Doc. I know one of the issues was he has some kids that are playing sports and are getting to be that age that he still wants to make time for that and be around them. So we'll see if Rajon Rondo is going to be in the same role, similar capacity, if he's going to be an assistant coach, or if there's no Rajon Rondo around this upcoming season. But leave your thoughts on the Chris Paul rumors and what his ideal role would be with this Bucks team. And again, if you get Chris Paul, it means one of those names is out. There's one very likely candidate. So is that something you would be in favor of? Leave your thoughts on that. And we'll see what you guys think coming up on tomorrow's show. Look for part 2, Eric and Jon Horst on The Athletic coming your way Friday. And then probably sometime this weekend, once Summer League officially wraps, we are going to get Frank for his thoughts on Summer League as a whole and another breakout performance from Chris Livingston. I'm sure that'll be a big, big piece of the conversation. But look for that early next week. That'll do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.